We're going to go on now with part 3 of this series on the timeline of the tribulation. Now, we saw the end times church. We had 2 conditions. The Church of Philadelphia, which he had not one bad thing to say about them, and he said he would keep them from that hour of testing because they had a little power. And we had the Church of Laodicea that he had not one good thing to say about, and he said he would spit them out of his mouth because they weren't ready, they weren't dressed, they were lukewarm, they weren't ready for that wedding. So we talked about how Philadelphia would be that first fruits, that pre-tribulation rapture that would be caught up into heaven to go with the groom to the Father's house as his friends for the wedding feast, which is before the wedding, before the marriage supper. The wedding feast was a feast in Hebrew weddings then in Galilee, where the groom would take his friends to his father's house for a wedding feast while the bride was preparing herself. So that's the first fruits. And then that would leave Laodicea, which he had nothing good to say about. And why would he have nothing good to say about that? Because he's already taken the ones that were waiting, watching, prepared, their lamps were lit. All that's left are those that are asleep. They're in Egypt, they're in Babylon, they're loving the world. They're the apostate son. He's waiting for them all to come back. But they're everywhere but where they should be. And a lot of Christians don't want to hear that anybody could go into the tribulation. But if you look into the Word at all, he's warning you constantly to be ready, to be watching, to be awake. He's not going to come if you're spiritually asleep and wake you up and say, hey, I told you to be outside with your lamp lit, but you're not, you're sleeping, but I'll wake you up and get you. Oh, the other guys, they're down in Egypt. They're having fun. They're at sporting events. They're banqueting. They're having fun in the world. I got to go down to Egypt and get them. Oh, I got to go to Babylon. They love Babylon. No, he's coming for them that are waiting, watching, prepared. He said he was coming to be alert. What do you think that means? You're all going? Why would he say that? So we see that pre-tribulation rapture represented in the Church of Philadelphia. The first fruits of a token of the harvest to come. Now the other Christians that go into the tribulation or get saved in the tribulation, that's just tribulation. They will be caught up, raptured, sometime around the middle of the tribulation with the 2 witnesses in Israel. So they will be out preaching the word. They will be preaching those 3 messages. They will be getting ready for their wedding. And I told you have that period of time between the first fruits rapture and the beginning of the tribulation. And God will be pouring his Spirit out upon Laodicea just prior to the tribulation and going early into the tribulation. And the tribulation starts day 1, hour 1, when Babylon falls from an asteroid hitting in the ocean. And I told you that the first 4 trumpets and the first 4 seals, the first 4 trumpets and the first 4 bowls of wrath cover the same thing. They're different views, different looks at an asteroid hitting. And you got to go back and see my messages if you haven't on them. But now, in this timeline, at the point that the first fruits, the pre-tribulation rapture has been taken place through those that were waiting and watching and ready, and Laodicea has been left, what happens from that time going to the fall of Babylon and early right after the tribulation? Because we saw in my messages going through the entire book of Revelation that in Revelation chapter 12 you have these 2 signs. They're signs. They're showing you something. And I have that message. One is ascending and one is descending. And you see that here in this woman about to give birth. And she gives birth to this son. She gave birth to a son, a male child who is to rule all the nations with a rod of iron. And her child was caught up to God in his throne. That's the first fruits rapture. But at the same time, what do you have here in Revelations 12:3? And another sign appeared in heaven, and behold, a great red dragon, having 7 heads and 10 horns, and on his heads were 7 crowns, and his tail swept away 1/3 of the stars of heaven and threw them to earth. And the dragon stood before the woman who was about to give birth, so that when she gave birth, he might devour her son. So Satan's falling to earth just before the first fruits rapture, because he falls down and he sees that he only has a short time left, and he wants to devour this child. So you have this one ascending, the first fruits rapture, those being caught up to heaven, and you have this one descending, Satan falling to earth. And Satan is going to fall to earth, and he's going to come down also right after the tribulation starts, right after the United States falls from that asteroid hits and upsets all the governments of the earth. Satan will come to set up his kingdom. And in Revelation 9, verse 1, and the 5th angel sounded. This is, remember, we've already went through the first 4 trumpets and the first 4 bowls of wrath. They're all talking about one thing, an asteroid hitting, seeing different looks and views and outcomes of it. And right after that, chapter 9, verse 1, the 5th trumpet, and the 5th angel sounded, and I saw a star from heaven, which had fallen to earth, and the key to the bottomless pit was given to him. So this is Satan again, another look at him fallen to earth. And he has the key to this bottomless pit. And what does he do? As he falls to earth, just prior to the pre-tribulation rapture, because he wants to devour that child, and he falls to earth, and in verse 2, and he opened the bottomless pit, and smoke went out of the pit like the smoke of a great furnace, and the sun and the air were darkened by the smoke of the pit. And you see, in verse 3, and out of the smoke came forth locusts upon the earth, and power was given as scorpions of the earth have power. Satan falls, he releases the spirits of darkness from the pit. He's releasing them to blind man, to bring man to his will, as he's going to set up his kingdom. He's going to use the spirits of darkness to get his will done. And he's going to bring about these things through the kingdom of the beast. At the same time that that is happening, we had the first fruits rapture. Satan's there wanting to devour that child about that time. Laodicea goes into the tribulation. The latter-day rain is beginning to be poured upon her. She has that seed in her. She has that seed, that word of God in her. But it hasn't brought forth fruit. It hasn't borne fruit. What does it need? The latter-day rain. The latter-day rain will be poured out upon the church of Laodicea. And she will begin to sprout leaves and to bear fruit like she should have. So we got her that goes into the tribulation, and there's time before the tribulation as the Spirit's being poured out upon her and as she's getting herself ready. Then that asteroid hits and Babylon falls. That's day 1 of the tribulation. But we have Laodicea receiving that latter-day rain. And we see that, saints, in Revelation chapter 8, starting in verse 3. And another angel came and stood at the altar holding a golden censer, and much incense was put on it. And the incense in the Old Testament represented the prayers of God. So we have this angel come, and it's at the altar holding a golden incense, a golden censer, and much incense was given to him that he might add it to the prayers of the saints upon the golden altar which was before God. This represents, as Laodicea sees she's left, as the tribulation is coming and starting, she will be praying and seeking God. And that's what this represents. The outpouring of the latter-day rain. The outpouring of the Holy Spirit upon the church of Laodicea, as she's going to go and preach those 3 messages. And in verse 4, and the smoke of the incense with the prayers of the saints went up before God out of the angel's hands. And the angel took the censer and filled it with fire from the altar, Remember, this is Pentecost, saints. You had the first fruits. Right after the Feast of First Fruits is the Feast of Pentecost. This is Pentecost. Just like in Acts, they had those tongues of fire. That's the word and the anointing of God coming upon them. And the angel took the censer and he filled it with the fire from the altar and threw it to the earth upon the saints. And there followed peals of thunder and sounds and flashes of lightning. So you have Laodicea receive this latter-day rain, that seed that's in that dry ground where she never receives water. She's not even clean. She's not dressed. But the latter-day rain will be poured out upon her, and that seed will start to bear fruit. It'll start first to sprout leaves, and then it'll bear fruit. So you have that. And then what she will do, Laodicea, just prior to the tribulation starting, after the first fruits rapture, and during the first 3.5 years of the tribulation, what Laodicea will be doing is what you see in Revelation chapter 14, 6 through 11. You have these three angels. I've told you before, angels are God's messengers always, but especially in the book of Revelation. They are bringing the Christians a message from God. And these three angels have these three messages, which will be the messages that the church that went into the tribulation and or gets saved during the tribulation will be preaching. And in verse 6, another angel flying in mid-heaven, having the eternal gospel to preach. This could only be the first message, preaching the eternal gospel as the tribulation is coming, after the antichrist and the kingdom of the beast are coming. The first message of the saints will be to preach the gospel. And then in verse 8, and another angel, a second one followed, saying, Fallen, fallen is Babylon the Great. The church's second message to preach will be this message from the angels, that Babylon has fallen. So you see at this point that she is preaching this, Babylon has already fallen. This is going into the tribulation. Babylon has fallen. She'll be preaching that message and the outcome and the results of it. And in verse 9, and another angel, a third one, followed them, saying with a loud voice, If anyone worships the beast and his image and receives a mark on his forehead or upon his hand, he will drink of the wine of the wrath of God. So the third message, that the church that goes into the tribulation and those who get saved in the tribulation, the third message, they will be warning about the kingdom of the beast and the coming of the antichrist. So this is what you have. This is what will happen after the first fruits are taken, after Laodicea starts having that latter-day rain fall upon her, and after the asteroid hits and Babylon falls. At that time, the kingdom of the beast, Satan has already fallen. Remember, Satan has fallen. He's released these demons. They're going to go to persuade these men, these people, these leaders, through the inspiration and the power of Satan to set up the kingdom of the beast. But they always say, oh, but God wouldn't do that to us. The first 3.5 years of the tribulation is just that. Tribulation, trouble, distress. People going through hurricanes, earthquakes, volcanoes. Nuclear bombs were dropped on Japan. There were Christians there. You don't think they went through tribulation? The first 3.5 years is tribulation as that asteroid hits and the effects of it, and the kingdoms of the world falling as the United States falls. And the thing that will result of that is these 200 million man armies fighting to protect their own country, their own water, their own land, their own people. But the kingdom of the beast will come to put an end to that, to bring peace so people can buy and sell and trade again. So we have these three angels preaching these three messages. But we also have in Joel Chapter 2, starting in verse 28. This same thing. Right now, I'm mainly focusing on that church that goes into the tribulation and gets saved in the tribulation. As she's going into the tribulation and the tribulation starts, she'll have that latter day rain poured upon her. And we see this in Joel 2:28. And it will come about after this, that I will pour out my spirit upon all mankind. All Christians want to say, oh, I wasn't called. The pastor's called. That evangelist was called. We're all called. We're called to lay down our life. You're called to have that ministry and power and glory of God flowing through you. You're called to bear fruit. We all are. But they all want to say, oh, it's for somebody else. They're too busy. They're just enjoying life. But they want to do their religious service. But at the coming of the tribulation and going into the tribulation, that's when he says, and it will come about after this, that I will pour out my spirit upon all mankind. All the church will have the spirit poured upon it. And not the worldly people, your sons and daughters will prophesy. Your old men will dream dreams. Your young men will see visions. And even on the male and female servants, I will pour out my spirit in those days. And I will display wonders in the sky and on the earth as this asteroid's coming down. The sun and the moon are blocked out. That big cloud goes up from the asteroid as the debris of the asteroid is spread around. And I will display wonders in the sky and on the earth. Blood, fire, columns of smoke as the asteroid goes up like a giant nuclear bomb, and all the debris and rocks and all the things that are being blown out of the city around there are just spread around for a long distance as columns of smoke come out of them. And in verse 31, the sun will be turned into darkness as that cloud darkens that area, and the moon into blood. The moon at night, on its brightest nights, you'll just see that reddish hint behind the smoke. And what does it say, saints? They try to tell you this is all at the end of the tribulation, or as you go through the tribulation. But what does it say? The sun will be turned into darkness, the moon into blood, before the great and awesome day of the Lord comes. This is at the beginning of the tribulation. And this God will do, and he will bring this about to get his bride ready. It's just tribulation. People in Florida just had a giant hurricane. They went through tribulation. They're still going through the tribulation of it. Peoples around the world are having more and more distress. Just because it ain't hitting you at this moment, don't mean God would never have anything happen to any Christians. There's tons of Christians where these disasters are. It's not that God is punishing you. It's not his wrath. The wrath of God is mainly in the last 3.5 years of the tribulation to those who reject him. And the church will be taken. The church that went into the tribulation or saved in the tribulation will be taken just before that. But then, at the midway point of the tribulation, when the church is taken, the two witnesses will be taken at that same time, or about that same time, when the Antichrist has them killed, and they're lying in the streets. But they are resurrected and raptured. At that point, Israel, when the Antichrist is there, wanting them to worship him, they're going to know that he's the devil, Satan. And they, because of the preaching, death and resurrection and rapture of those two witnesses, they're going to turn to the true Messiah. That will start the Great Tribulation. The church will be gone then. But the wrath of God is still not come. But the wrath of the Antichrist will be poured upon the Jews as they turn to the Messiah. And you say, oh, God would never allow that to happen to me. It's going to happen to the Jews. Who are they? They are God's people, and at that point they will be born again Christians. And they're going to go through something you could never imagine. And I'm going to have a special message. Maybe I'll throw it in on the next one before we continue with this, because God showed me something else about that, about the crown of life. And I want to bring that to you, probably in the next message. But let's continue to make his path straight, to prepare the way of the Lord. Subscribe, get others, tell them I don't know what to do. I just trying to share this. I live in a wilderness area. I can't get to people hardly at all. But I thank God for this, that I can share it, and you can pass it on, and you can be the voice of one crying in the wilderness.